Welcome to Thursday Reviews. Today we have the power plug meter that I unboxed on last week's episode. I'll have the link of that in the description, but for now, let's get to it.
So this is it. How are you supposed to say this? Let's see how text-to-speech handles it.
Floureon.
Floureon. Floureon.
Okay, so let's take a better look at the Floureon. I know I said it before, but it's much larger than I was expecting. The screen on this thing is huge. It measures roughly 2¼ inches by 1¾ inches, or 5.72 centimeters by 4.44 centimeters. You can also see the Floureon logo up here. Before we get into what the buttons do, I should say that this thing has a built-in battery, but mine's dead. Okay, I've charged it up. Let's go over the buttons and what they do. The function button on the Floureon switches between 7 different modes. I'll go over that in more detail in a minute. The cost button shows the amount you'll pay per kilowatt hour. Remember that the purpose of this thing is to show your energy consumption to whatever you plug into the plug in the front. The up and down buttons are for when you set the amount of money per kilowatt hour. To set it, you hold the cost button until the indicator begins flashing, use the function key to switch between digits, and up and down will set the value per kilowatt hour. Push cost when you're done. Here are the 7 modes. It defaults to time, power in watts, and cost. The second mode is time, energy consumption in kilowatt hours, and days. The third mode shows time, voltage coming from the outlet, and frequency. What? The battery! Let me plug it in and I'll continue. Here's the backlight while I switch to the 4th mode, which is time, current, and power factor. The 5th mode is time and the lowest recorded power in watts, which is stored in memory even after unplugging everything. The 6th mode is mostly the same. It shows the time, but instead of the lowest reading, it remembers the highest. The 7th mode shows the cost per kilowatt hour, which is the same as just pushing the cost button. If you're on a mode like the voltage one and just push the cost button, it's like a shortcut to the last mode. But it'll switch back after a few seconds. Here are some of the specs. The Floureon can handle a maximum of 15 amps and 1800 watts. If it gets close enough to 1800 watts, it lights up an overload in the screen. It's only meant to run on the 120 volt 60 Hz North American system. Don't try using it in Europe. You might notice the reset button in the middle. It does exactly that and clears the memory. I use it quite a bit, but I just use the probe lead from my meter that I reviewed on this show as well. I know this is supposed to be used for monitoring energy consumption and seeing how efficient a device is, but in the case of what I use it for, I only need this for testing purposes, so that cost per kilowatt hour seemed more like a gimmick to me. I'm sure it works fine, but I've read reviews that say it's not the best idea to leave it plugged in for long periods of time, or using a large appliance like a refrigerator or something plugged into it. For testing current draw and power factor, it's much more convenient than breaking through your circuits and doing a bunch of math with a voltmeter by your side. It's time to test the meter out. I'll plug a few things into it, and we will see exactly what happens. First things first, let's just put it on voltage. This camera does not pick it up very well. 125.2, that seems kind of high, doesn't it? Let's plug in my Airwick, which I did actually review on this channel already. Oh, it's already plugged in. Okay, the current draw is 23 milliamps, and the power factor you'd think would be higher than that, but it's 0.69. Even though, from what I was thinking, it's pretty much just taking the power from here to heat up through the device. Now, if I were to unplug the actual tank, it's still drawing the exact same amount of current. So there's no switch or anything in here, it's always heating. And power in watts, the lowest reading was 2.8, and the highest, meaning right now, it's 2.8 watts. So it's pretty consistent.
And energy consumption, I don't have the value set. I don't really care about all that. I just care about current draw, power factor, stuff like that. So now we know that's the Airwick, which I did review on this channel. Next, let's do this battery charger, which I also reviewed on this channel. I don't know why, but I remember the episode of this one, but not my Airwick. This was episode 10. So let's see. Let's plug in the charger. Okay, now there's no battery in here, but there is a green light and there is a fan in there that will turn on when there's batteries actually charging. Let's see if it draws any energy even though I'm not charging a battery. Yeah, 35 milliamps and a very, very low power factor. I'm sure the power factor gets better when you put a fan in there. I mean, when you put a battery in there and the fan's running. But yeah, that's not great. 35 milliamps and it's not even... So don't leave the chargers plugged in even if there's no battery in there. Well, that's kind of good to know. 1.4 watts was the lowest power, 2.8. Oh yeah, see the 2.8 watts was actually still from when I had my Airwick in there. So right now it's at 1.4 watts. And so you can see, even after unplugging it, if we go to those last modes, it still remembers the lowest and highest power ratings. So you'd have to actually put something in there and reset it each time if you're going to plug in a new device. Which is why I don't really care for the whole memory thing. If you wanted to have the memory values, whatever. It's kind of cool having the highest and lowest, but can kind of be an annoyance. So, wow, I have a lot of plugs over here, don't I? This goes to my USB hub, so let's try that. Again, not powering anything, and then I'll plug in my phone and my iPad, and we'll see if it... You hear the noise? I'm not sure. It always does that. It does always do that. Okay. Current draw is, again, like 26 milliamps, even though I'm not powering anything. There is an LED light on here, and if I were to turn on the actual, there's little lights down here. If I were to turn that on, then yeah, look at that, 38 milliamps. Sorry, windows everywhere. 39 milliamps. The darker setting goes to 28 milliamps, and with the lights off, only 27 milliamps, 26 milliamps, because there's already a light in the back. And that's not powering anything, so the power factor is 0. Interestingly enough. So I wonder if it had a... Interesting. Okay, and the wattage, 0.5 watt. So not too bad. Now, with the current rating on screen, I'm going to plug in my phone, and we're going to see what happens to the current. Okay, so I'm going to plug in my phone to the USB hub, and we'll see how the current draw is affected. Yep, goes up to 100 and levels out about 125 milliamps. But it was already drawing 20 milliamps, so about 0.1 amps is what it's drawing. With a and about 7 watts. And you'll notice the timer counting up there. That'll always keep going. Voltage is about the same. And so, yeah. Yeah, so it kind of fluctuates a bit, but that's okay. So now, if I unplug my phone, whoops, and knock lights around everywhere, because I have flashlights stuck to my door. What, you don't believe me? I literally have lights stuck to my door. Now, let's see the current draw of my hair dryer, which I reviewed pretty recently, actually. The Revlon hair dryer. Let's see if it wastes power when it's plugged in. Look at that. Well, yeah, only about 2 million. Yeah, that's barely anything. And if we see how much power, yeah, 0. So absolutely nothing. So that 2 milliamps of current is probably just, I wouldn't say leakage current, but just, you know, power that you're not even paying for. And so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn it on to the low setting, and we're going to see how this works. About 3.5 amps.
And the power, 430 watts. Okay, now I'll put it on high, but look, the power factor is at almost perfect, so it's not wasting any power. Let's put it on high. Yeah, that's close to the limit, almost 15 amps, and 1700 watts. And there, now I've turned it off. So after all those tests, there was a little bit of actual energy consumption in that amount of time, but I'm going to do a test with my voltmeter, and we are going to test the voltage and the frequency from my meter. Now, of course, I'm going to trust this meter a little bit more than my Floureon, but let's take off these things, and I will probe this. So this is saying 119.8, and this is at 121.3. So, yeah, they're close, but I don't think that's really close enough. And that, of course, affects power reading, because in order to get watts, it's volts times amps, voltage times current. But it also takes into effect reactive power and, all that stuff. So it's not exactly a perfect voltage times current. There is other stuff into it, but that's the simplest way to calculate power. And on a DC system, there is no waste of power anywhere, and so it really is just voltage times current. Now I'm going to test frequency. So it's continuously showing me 59 hertz. Now if I put a probe lead in here, there. It goes, 59.97, so it is actually 59 hertz. So it pretty much, it does not round. The moment that were to go up to 60, then it would actually, there, it actually just did went up to 60. It did went up. I know I'm not able to speak English that even makes sense. So yeah, it's actually pretty close for frequency at least, but yeah.
So now I will go over the pros and cons of the Floureon plug meter. So what do I like about it? Well, the first thing is it does everything. It doesn't just show you current draw, voltage, and all that. I mean, it has the power, the highest and lowest power readings stored in memory. It can tell you energy consumption, everything. Everything that you need to know about what's coming out of your outlets. I also like the screen on this. It's huge, and it shows you more than one thing at a time. It's kind of similar to the Hoppy meter, which I might include a picture of, that is used on some of BigClive.com's YouTube videos. He actually took that thing apart recently. Anyway, it has 6 screens on it that show you the voltage, current, frequency, all the stuff on the screen at the same time. And I just think that's really helpful instead of having to cycle through each individual mode. You have multiple things on screen at a time. It just makes it a lot better, and it looks a lot better doing it that way, and it just makes more sense doing it that way. I also like that you can find these things everywhere online. I got it on Amazon, and they're pretty cheap. This one was, I think, anywhere from $12 to $15, something like that. So they're relatively inexpensive. I also like that it is able to keep the numbers in memory. Now, I will never need to use the memory feature for anything, but I know some people will do tests and things on this meter, and it would be nice to have the highest and lowest numbers recorded in here, so even after you unplug it, all the numbers are still in there for your highest and lowest wattage readings and your energy consumption values, or whatever you may be testing. The fact that it has memory makes it a pro for me. And also the fact that it can be reset very easily, so not necessarily if something goes wrong, but if you just want to clear the numbers, if you're going to plug something else into here, whatever, you can take whatever and just reset it with it. I also like that you can actually buy these in multiple versions. This is the North American version where it has the North American sockets, but you can get the European plugs, and I'm pretty sure you can get more, but the fact that they do offer 220 volt versions or 240 volt versions or whatever that have the different plugs on the back here makes it so you can use it wherever. I would not use an adapter here and plug it into 240 volts and see what happens. I would not do that. I'm sure it would handle it just fine, but the operating voltage rate is between 110 and 130 volts, so you would probably fry it. But they do offer different versions of it, you just have to look for them. So, I mentioned it already, but it's really big. You would think that it would be able to plug into these outlets, but it hits the top of my desk, and it's rather annoying. So what I have to do is I have to plug it in over on this side, upside down, so that it will fit. And that's just kind of an annoyance. Also, if you are not looking at it at the correct angle, it can be quite hard to read. It's very hard to read the numbers unless you're looking at it from just the right spot. I also think it's weird how low of a current and power rating it has. Like, the power rating itself is 1800 watts. That's not very high. The current rating, 15 amps. Depending on the things that you may be powering, that may not be a lot. Our furnace draws over 50 amps. Or many things draw over 50 amps. Your car draws over 200 amps, or depending on what kind of car you have. And 15 amps just is not really that much. Well, with that being said, it's still good for testing everyday items, and so I'll give it that. It's definitely a pretty handy tester. And so, I thank you for watching this week's episode, and I will have a new video next week, and I'll see you then.